now I want to get to my guest, Doug McElway from the Fox News Channel, reporting on what's going on down in the great state of Texas. Doug, how are you?
Doing well, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I think in Missouri, they passed a bill similar to this that wouldn't allow a city to designate itself as a sanctuary city, but they still didn't go as far as this Texas bill would with penalties and the like. What can you tell us about it?
That's right. This is probably the toughest anti-sanctuary bill that we've seen anywhere in the country today. It's now passed both state houses in Texas as of last week. Needs to still be reconciled and signed by the governor, but I don't think there's not much doubt that that's going to happen. What this bill would do is allow Texas law enforcement to question anybody about immigration status for even a simple traffic stop, for example. It would also, and this is really, I think, what sets it apart from other legislation we're seeing in other states, is it would allow any police chief, any sheriff, any mayor who failed to follow the law, whether federal immigration law or Texas law, to be fined and even jailed. Governor Abbott was on with Maria Bartiromo over the weekend, and he said we're talking about fines as high as $25,000 per day, and that they could be exposed to jail time if they didn't follow the law. What's interesting about this is that it sets it up for a potentially gargantuan fight with law enforcement in Texas, ironically, or at least reluctant law enforcement, because police chiefs in Dallas and Houston, Austin, Arlington, Fort Worth, and in San Antonio, as well as an organization of chiefs of police across the state, are all opposed to this bill. They wrote in a joint op-ed, and I'm quoting now, "This will lead to distrust of police and less cooperation from members of the community, and it will foster the belief that people cannot seek assistance from police for fear of being subjected to an immigration status investigation." Now, obviously, the other side, proponents of this bill, vehemently disagree with that. I did an interview with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick just a little while ago, and he cited a number of Department of Homeland Security crime statistics from Texas that since 2011 through January of this year, they have arrested over 212,000 criminal aliens in that state. They've charged them with over 566,000 crimes, including over 1,000 murders, over 6,000 sexual assaults, 67,000 drug offenses and burglaries, and over 500 kidnappings. So Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor, says when people hear us say sanctuary cities make cities safer, he believes they're absolutely wrong.
Right. It sounds to me like the bill is just trying to get them to pretty much follow what the regulations are being handed down from DHS. But let me ask this question. I'm trying to tax my memory here for a moment. I remember when Arizona passed its sort of an immigration bill a couple years ago under President Obama, and the Justice Department immediately sued them in court, and their law got tossed out. So are there likely to be legal challenges to this?
Yeah. In fact, I just asked Dan Patrick about that as well, and there's no doubt this is going to be facing legal challenges. The bill, by the way, as I said, it's expected to be signed into law perhaps as early as the end of this week, but it's not going to take effect until September. So who knows what our immigration laws will be by that juncture, what the federal immigration laws will be. But when this law does take effect by September in the state of Texas, I'm sure that oppositional groups will have their legal challenges and litigation all lined up and ready to be teed off.
Yeah. The cities you mentioned, I mean, Austin sticks out in my mind. That tends to be, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know about the other cities for sure, but that tends to be a sort of a Democratic stronghold in the city of Austin where they're more likely to push for something like a sanctuary city.
Right. In fact, the sheriff in Travis County was vehemently opposed to this kind of thing, and it has been violating state law. And as a result of that, Governor Abbott has withdrawn some state funding. So state funding grants to her, and I think that she's mitigated her stance a little bit. But you get a little sense of what the oppositional position will be when it comes to litigation here. I did an interview with Steve Adler, who was in town recently for a Conference of Mayors gathering here, and he met with the Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. And at that time, it was just a couple of weeks ago, he said that they see these violations by undocumented people in this country as civil violations. It's not a criminal violation, but a civil violation. And he said our policy and our local law enforcement personnel, their job is to go out and apprehend people for criminal violations, not for civil violations. So I suspect that will be the basis for any litigation we see down the road. Of course, it's not a civil violation in terms of federal law. It's a criminal violation to be here legally.
Well, that's Doug McKelway with the Fox News Channel. We'll look for your story on this and that interview with the Lieutenant Governor coming up.
Okay.
Hey, Doug, thank you so much for the input. I appreciate it. Yeah. All right, good. Doug McKelway there from the Fox News Channel covering this story down there in the great state of Texas. Good for them. Good for them. Follow the law. For God's sake, do I want every police officer on the street to have to question people about their immigration status? Maybe not. They've got enough on their plate. But there has to be a guideline in place telling you that if ICE puts a hold on somebody, you hold them. You don't get to decide whether you're going to hold them or not just because you disagree with the immigration policy of the current president. You don't get to make that. That's the beauty of a ruling like this. It gives them guidelines. And it tells people, unlike the ones in San Francisco who choose to release axe murderers who go back out and murder again, that if this happens in your town, you're responsible for it. We're going to hold you liable if you let one of these people go who ICE needs to talk to or has a violent criminal record and they go out and commit another violent crime. That's on you. So good for Texas. You know they'll have the backing of this attorney general, so I'm glad to hear that. Boy, the Washington Post just sickens me sometimes. They had a big article this weekend on the fact that even though the president has had a hard time implementing some of his hardline immigration policies, his overall strategy seems to be working. Fear. That's what they think that his strategy is of scaring people. Just because he said at the NRA speech last week, the world is getting the message. Our border's no longer open to illegal immigration. It's not about fear. It's about law and order. If you can't control your border, you're not a sovereign nation. If you're like the EU and you just decide to have open borders for everyone, you lose some of that sovereignty as well. Ask the people in Britain who stood up and said, hell no. We're going to leave the European Union so we can control who's coming in and out of our country. And the French election may well hinge on that. This Macron guy's held the edge. He is dropping in the polls now, and Marie Le Pen is peaking. So with any luck, when they have this vote next week in France, some common sense will take over there as well. I think, again, there's an undercurrent that people aren't reading real well in the media over in France, just like there was for Donald Trump. All right.